Thrand here, and I'm here in behalf of Roland Warzecha, who proposed the cast blow to us from examining actual historical swords in museums, the pommel, how close the grip was, and old depictions and drawings and artwork. That's where he got the idea that the sword was accelerated with the shield, and the shield was primarily used to defend with. So you end up in a position that some people call the handshake grip, but it's kind of a misnomer because that's the position it ends up in when you cast it out, because there's lots of positions you could start in. What we discovered with it, it has extreme power. You don't have to step with it in like a conventional fencing with a sword used to defend with instead of the shield. But what ends up happening is we found with that extreme power behind the point, because you're accelerating it, that's where the most energy is, that you can actually cut through heavy gambits and stuff that otherwise were thought not to be possible. People like John Clements did experiments with Gambeson, and if you look them up online, you'll see that he determined that you couldn't take a Viking Age sword or anything like that, which he thought was one of the best cutting swords that was European, and cut through Gambeson. He wasn't able to cut through it. Well, we tried conventional cutting, and no, you can't cut through it. But if you get the proper angle with the cast blow, you can cut through Gambeson and much more. We can cut through like 20 gauge steel and stuff like that with the point of the sword coming in at just the right angle with the cast blow to the acceleration. So what we want to do today is further our experiments for Roland Warzecha. He proposed the cast blow. The SCA uses the snapshots, very similar to the cast blow. It's a very similar technique, it's more streamlined, kind of more of a kendo style but one-handed. And what we're going to do today is we're going to try what they would probably call a wrap shot, but we would call it a back edge or false edge cut. Because I believe that honestly hitting the flat of the blade is not how you cut through the Gambeson. That's why John Clements wasn't able to go through. You have to have a sharp edge, just like Shad's brought up on his channel a million times, that to cut Gambeson, it's very difficult to go through. You have to have a really sharp edge. If you get a dull edge, it won't go through. So today we're going to do the cast blow, but we're going to come in at an angle, accelerating the tip and cut with the tip. Not with the flat, like we're impacting it, but with the tip and see if we can actually go through Gambeson. My theories are it's going to cut very well and it'll probably cut through just the same as it does with the cast blow forwards. I want to also bring up Matt Easton. He talked about the double-edged blade and the benefits. He did cover a lot of things, and one of the things about a double-edged blade is what we've discovered is for thrusting. If the sword doesn't have too much flex to it, the double-edged blade, well, even with the flex, is better than a back sword that has no false edge at all at the tip, like in saber fencing or something. There's nothing. The double edge actually pierces way better because it's easier to cut both sides as it thrusts in, even if it's a wider blade. So that's one advantage to it. I think he brought up once that you could flip the blade if it gets dull. I'm sure that would be important too against Gambesons or anything that you could cut. But I think that the actual back edge was very useful in the right circumstances. Was something that was used quite often in early period with less armor and larger shields and shield fencing. So let's go ahead and experiment today and see if that happens to be so. Alright, I'm going to try the cut that I'm going to try today on the Gambeson first, and we're going to try it on the roll wet newspaper and see how well it cuts. It's very difficult to cut, remember that? And we've got like a 3-inch roll. Oh! And everybody says the back edge can't cut with a cast style blow. Now I know I was stepping. I would say they don't know what they're talking about. Alright, that's a 3-inch roll, like I said. You look at that, that is a beautiful cut coming up at an angle. You see this at a lot of saber type style fencing, which actually got approved for actual, I guess, official saber fencing. You hear about that with the short edge. This is called a false edge when it's facing you. This is the true edge facing the opponent, but if I flip it, it goes either way. But the question is, could the back edge cut you if it was around a shield or something? Let's say I was using a shield, or I was fighting, that was my only move, was to tip cut to the belly or something as I'm backing out. Yes. So you could get an extra cut coming up and then coming down. Just like you would with like maybe a two-handed sword. Like you see a lot of times with long swords, sometimes they'll come up with the back of the edge or bring it over the top or what have you to come back with the other edge to make it more fluid and efficient, the style. But with the cast style blow, which I was casting, I was throwing it out there and letting the blade do the work, like Roland Warzecha speaks of, we got a perfect cut. Alright, the first cut I'm going to do, I'm going to be doing a stepping cut. I'm going to step in and try slicing through the Gambeson. We've already tested this many times. I doubt it's going to go through. This is 12 layers of tightly woven, heavy cotton. And yes, they used cotton in the later century for Gambesons or army jacks or jackets, or what have you. 12 layers, especially as dense and tough as this, is pretty dang decent. So, as you've seen in other videos, we've stopped arrows with it and so on. And let's see what it was able to do. We scored a layer of fabric. We got a few little cuts in it, but it only went through the first layer. And if you watch that, there's lots of bounce in that. This is like a belly. That's the whole point to this. So not only were we trying to cut, we're also dealing with bounce with the straight edge. So that causes a problem. We found that tip shots, where we step in with a cast blow and throw the sword out, actually hitting at this kind of angle, can cut into it. Today we're going to try the back edge, so let's see what happens with that. Alright, I'm going to try the back edge cut and come in this way, and I'm going to be stepping with it. It makes it a little safer for me, since I'm not using a shield. Now, one argument would be that this leaves me open in any type of duel if I'm using a sword to fence with. This is true. In lost fetched and unarmored combat, you might not want to use this technique as often unless it's a rising cut or something to come back. You know, so yes, but we're doing it in more of an angular situation because we want to hit it the proper angle to cut the gambeson if it's possible with the back edge. Let's go ahead and test that out. And I'm using more of a cast blow. The step's mostly to protect me, not to generate so much to generate power. Oh! Whoa! The back edge was able to cut through that many layers of cloth and easily enter a bottle. So that is the trick right there. Would have done a little bit better if we were doing a cast blow straight forward, but still that's more than enough to wound your opponent through some type of armor covering like this, that many layers of cloth, which normally you couldn't draw or push cut through it easily. You just really don't get much through that. You're not going to get into the guy unless you can just really lean your whole body weight on it, set in there and pull if you were grappling pretty much. You see how many layers it actually went through. That's how thick this is. This is almost a ½ inch thick. This type of woven thick cloth as we have. And so I'm extremely impressed. The back edge a lot of times is a little bit weaker, especially than the front cast blow. So it cutting into this bottle like that, knowing it stuck in about a couple inches or so, it's still impressive enough for me to wound a guy in battle through material like this that you can't normally cut. Alright, we've had some comments about cutting the gambeson, saying it's such a wide section like cutting across the belly, and not cutting against, let's say, the side or an arm or leg covered in gambeson, which of course maybe the arms would have thick parts here but not as much in the bends and so on, would be easier if it was a smaller rounded surface. The only flaw we have here different is this bottle is a lot lighter due to being a small rounded surface, and we have no way to set it up like an actual arm or leg that would be stationary. But what we're going to try to do is cut against it because we'll be hitting less fibers. So there's a logic to this. We're going to hit a smaller section with less fibers, a lot like the tip shot does on the broader section, either way. And we'll see if it cuts it. So that's there, or cuts any deeper. I'll try with a slice to start off with. And I try to draw it as much as I could, but there is plenty of bounce. Even on this surface, went through a little bit more cloth, but not much. I think against a shoulder or bone or something, let's say it was right over your bone, and it was mostly cloth and not much padding, they didn't add any extra padding there, then yes, you might be able to cut through more, but it's more of a cleaving or hacking thing. I'm trying to slice through it knowing that edges are what works the best against this type of material. This kind of thing is going to bounce. You watch it, it bounces and gives. So yeah, the hacking thing probably wouldn't do it. It would knock it off the table is all we'd have. See if we can tip shot it with this. Yeah, I'm going to do more of a cast blow, where I let the weight of the blade from the wrist do it and hold on to the back of the pommel by letting it, that much force that it's trying to pull it out of my hand. And I'm going to step with it to make it safer, and we'll see what that does. Oh! I'm sorry, we lost it due to the weight.
But the weight didn't stop you from making that tip cut.
No. Now, since we lost some of the weight there, look at the cut in that fabric. That many layers of fabric. We've got it all the way through. And we've got it into the bottle. Now a lot of you say it's not a very deep wound. The bottle actually is pretty difficult to cut. I mean, it's pretty nasty. This is a thick bottle, and the person will be wounded. I mean, you got to think about it. If you came around something with a shield or something and hit somebody in an area where you cut him in the thigh or something, and all he had was Gambeson or heavy cloths, thinking he was protected, that might be a good cut. He might be losing a lot of blood. Most people died from blood loss in battles. They would get cut and they would keep fighting and they couldn't stop the bleeding because their heart was pumping and they were on adrenaline. And even if it didn't seem oh so deep, he would know he's wounded. And over time he would get lightheaded and that would pretty much be the end of it. But we actually made it through. Whereas a lot of attacks, if we didn't hit with just the proper edge alignment and the blade with the tip of it, it wouldn't have cut this fabric. There's no way.